Right. Yes. So thank you, Michael and Anna, for agreeing to be interviewed for our drought resilience project that we're running here in Tasmania, looking at how farmers have come through the drought from a couple of years ago, how they came through with ground cover that they were happy with and with at a profit as well. So would you mind just running through where your property is and your enterprises and that type of thing for me, please?
We've got two main places. One is at Holbrook, just east of Holbrook, and it's a beef cattle breeding operation. And we've got a place out near Miranda, south of Narandra, and that's a mirror image of the Holbrook place. So we do an autumn calving out there and a spring calving at Holbrook. Use the same set of bulls. They go do a campaign out west and then come back in and do a campaign at Holbrook. That's pretty well it. We're turning them the steer weaners off as weaner yearlings, so we're not taking them on, run everything in one mob except for a couple of months of the year after we wean, and then the heifers go back in with the cows. Basically, it's one mob.
So would you describe how you farm as typical of farmers in your area?
It isn't typical, but there's been a sea change, I think. When we first bought the country, we bought the first block at Holbrook. The conventional wisdom from the agronomists were to get your place as bare as you could by, say, the 1st of March, so you get a good clover strike. And people did it pretty well. And that's changed. There's been a sea change. Ground cover as you drive around is much, much better. So people are much more mindful of that, looking after their country. There's various ways they might be doing that, like putting them into a sacrifice paddock and feeding them, or a feedlot, or whatever, which we wouldn't bother doing. But that's that consciously trying to protect ground cover is much more prevalent now. So that's becoming more the norm, I would say, around here. How they go about it sometimes might be dubious or whatever.
I think particularly here, most farmers are still quite conventional. They're still set stocked. They still would spread fertiliser. They'd still cut and feed hay. They might do some cropping. And we don't do any of that. So we're still quite different in that all our cattle are in one mob and get moved most days. But for most of our neighbours, it'd still be set stock, sort of.
So how do you maintain your ground cover then? Is it reducing stock numbers in times when feed's getting low, or is that, or you do the similar?
Not really. Our basic premise is to have lots of paddocks. So at Holbrook, I think we've got 187 or thereabouts paddocks, and we're doing a 180-day rest period sort of thing. And we just found with a lot of paddocks, you become much more resilient.
And I mean, drought's less rain, it's not no rain. So in that 180 days, you've had some sort of moisture, and therefore you should have had some sort of growth. So by the time the cattle come round to that first paddock again, there's something in there, and we're not leaving them there too long to do damage. Like, basically they're all on a 1-day graze period at the most. So they haven't had a chance to take too much out of the paddock. Like, you've still got a residual left. I mean, our mantra basically is 100% ground cover 100% of the time, and that's really vital. So even in a drought, we just keep them moving.
Yeah. So what brought you to that decision to put everything into one mob?
We did holistic management training in 1998. And before we'd actually even started the course, the educator came and visited, and we were in the middle of a drought then, and he said, do nothing but mob up and see what happens. And that's what we did. Mm. And we've kept doing it ever since.
Yes. Yes. So do you have any issues around weeds?
Just going back to that, the main reason we like one mob is that we get uniform grazing, and we also get allows us to have a long rest period without overgrazing a paddock while it's in there, while the cattle are in there. So they're not taking a bite of a growing plant a second time while in that graze, and they're in and out pretty quick. Just on the stocking rates, I mean, we've got a conventional farmer next door to us who I would describe as a very good conventional farmer. He is running 20 DSE per hectare and feeding and fertilising a lot, where we're only running about 13 or 14. So there's a difference there.
Mm, mm, mm. So with the lower stocking rate, I don't know whether you're privy to any profitability studies in your district, but does your stocking rate reflect profitability? As in, are you keeping more of your costs or your profit?
Well, yeah, I think so. I think I mean, it's net profit per hectare that counts, really. And I think our business is much more resilient because our feed supply is more resilient, and we just don't have the costs
mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that some of the other farmers around here would have, and we can keep a large portion of our income to grow more grass with more fencing or more waters and things like that, or off farms, stuff. So we think what we know, we're keeping. We have done some benchmarking with conventional farmers, and we know that we're keeping a lot of our money income to do other things,
mm-hmm.
apart from paying wages, fertiliser, that sort of thing.
Mm. And that's those costs that you've been able to reduce is your haymaking and feeding out and fertiliser? Is that would they be the main?
Yeah, probably. But we've gone contract with a lot of things. I mean, we've attacked everything. We became pretty aggressive in our costs. I was just thinking of one the other day that we I can't remember what it was now, but I'm sorry.
But all our animal health, like we don't drench or vaccinate any of our herd, mm-hmm. Because they're going onto fresh pastures every day, and so there's no worm burdens or parasite burdens or anything like that. And Holbrook particularly is renowned as being a fluke area, and we never lost, like if we've lost a cow or something that we haven't been sure about, we've had an autopsy done and there's nothing explainable as to why she's died. So there's none of the normal, bloat or liver fluke or anything. So we also save a lot in animal health expenses just because our land's healthy, therefore our animals are healthy.
Yep, for sure. Do you have, since you've put everything in one mob and changed your management, have you changed your animal phenotype with it? Is it still the same type of cow that you had back in the beginning before you mobbed up, or?
Well, basically, yeah.
Yeah, we never went big. We never went large cows.
Mm.
We went for fertility. We've always basically selected on fertility, and I think that keeps a lid on going too big and lean and mean. And the stud we buy, we've got a contract where we buy 10 bulls a year. And the stud that we buy from is always been on that mantra too. They weren't trying to breed biggest cows in Riverina. They were trying to breed a most profitable cow.
Yeah. But I think also everything in our herd has been bred on the place, and it's multi-generational within that herd. And so I think there's a lot on epigenetics.
Yep.
Just, you know, they've been raised in that environment, so they know what's going on and they can succeed in the environment that we've created. So they're very good at self-selecting feed, you know, because the pastures are really diverse just with natives. And so they can naturally medicate, and, you know, and so I think there's a lot of just natural smarts basically within that herd. Like they've just learnt, and it's all been passed down intergenerationally, that sort of knowledge as well. So I think that's quite important. Like I think when we had bought cows in, invariably they were out again within 12 months, either because they hadn't calved or they hadn't raised a live calf or they hadn't got back in calves. So everything within our herd's been born and bred on the place.
So as far as barriers to adopting a similar model, did you have any hiccups through the transition of putting them all into one mob, whether it was the convenience of it, or whether it was fencing or water, or was there anything that got in the way that made it inconvenient, or that you had to overcome to actually for this to roll along conveniently?
Yeah, we had some bruises here and there. We sort of were used to, when I left school, I went droving for 6 months with a fairly big herd of cattle, and I think it's stood me in good stead in that, well, handling it, being just being comfortable with big mob for a start, and also water and all that sort of thing. So we don't spend any money on fertiliser, but or fuel or tractors. We've got no machinery. We really put the broom through all that. So all we've got is a few side-by-side bikes. That's all we've got, and a ute. Don't own a tractor. But we do spend a lot of money, or in the context of our business, we spend a lot of money on waters and fencing. So it's we've really been going at it pretty hard to improve all our waters, more watering points, and just then, keep cutting paddocks up.
But we've also just increased our numbers naturally. Like we haven't gone out and purchased 1,000 cows or something. So it's gradually increased in numbers over the years. And we're at a place now that I think we feel comfortable with as far as management goes, like getting more cattle than we've got through the yards with calf marking or weaning or stuff. We're probably at that sort of optimum. Like the country could probably carry more cattle, but just from a physically, logistical point of view, we think we're comfortable with where we're at, just to be able to get that number of cattle through the yards and processed without leaving calves off their mothers for too long or all that sort of stuff. So, so we haven't done much on the cattle yards. Like we haven't had to increase the size of our yards or our infrastructure and things like that. And we get contractors in for any of those sort of jobs. So we just get a team of men in that, help with calf marking or weaning or anything like that. So that helps too. So I think a lot of it's a social issue, like getting your head around it. If you're coming from a conventional thing, the hardest thing is probably that social issue. There used to be so much, if you're not doing this, then you're a bad farmer. If you're not doing that, you're a bad farmer. So I think, we don't really concentrate on well, we don't take much notice of weeds except like woody weeds. And so there's that social thing of Patterson's curse or something. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, there's those sort of things that you just got to overcome mentally.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen a change in the quantity of weeds? Has it gone up or down with just having the one mob?
Oh, definitely gone down.
Yeah. With a longer recovery.
And that's symptomatic of ground cover.
Yeah.
Like most weeds are a low successional plant, so they're like bare ground. And so they'll come in first to cover that space. And then as the grasses improve, then those weeds disappear. And
just got much more diversity of perennial grasses, particularly, and other stuff too. Yeah.
So we don't, I mean, Christine Jones says there's no such thing as a weed. So we quite like that. And it's there for a reason. I mean, it's there because you've created the environment for it. But cattle will eat most things anyway at certain stages. So we just think it adds to the diversity. So it doesn't actually worry us too much.
Yes. So would you be able to talk a bit about your fencing design, whether you've got like the wagon wheel or just suitably sized paddocks or strips, and whether do you take your water with the cows or back fence or dams or just what the actual design of your infrastructure is like?
Well, we've basically run with what we had. We don't do wagon wheels, but we have got paddocks. We have got some paddocks, particularly out west, where 4 paddocks might go into the one watering point. We don't use any electric fencing now, but we did do a bit one-wire electric fencing when we started, just to get the paddocks quicker. So we're doing conventional fencing, just steel post every 6 metres or 4 metres, depends where they are. Blah blah blah. Gate in every corner, so we keep moving our cows and heifers when they're calving. So we like to have a gate in every corner, so there's no dead corners, if you know what I mean. So if a heifer calves, plants a calf, goes into the new paddock, it's quite fluid for her to get back to her calf. So there's no dead corner that she might not be able to work out for a while. And it also just helps the fluid. The more gates you've got, the wider they are. Double the gates, we use double 16-footers. It just helps the whole thing, and especially when it's wet, it just helps, it becomes more fluid. Mm-hmm. And
the waters are all permanent dams here, most of which is spring fed, and then out at Miranda we've got creeks and bores. They're all solar with an overflow dam as well.
Yeah.
So waters are all fairly bomb proof, like.
So we can deliver a lot of water, and we've also got backup in every paddock. So we don't check our waters every day, even if it's 40 degrees. We don't need to. We know the cattle are right if there's a malfunction somewhere.
Yeah. So there's a couple of smaller paddocks here that are on troughs, but otherwise everything's got a permanent water source in each paddock.
So what is your mob size, and do you feel that there's a maximum mob size that you can have that would work under that style of management?
Well, I don't think there'd be a maximum, except for the factors of delivering the water and just doing operations like calf marking and stuff like that. I think you don't want to have a cow more than 24 hours away from a calf, because they start storming around, smashing things. And so you want to be able to get them through, get them up and get them out with the cows. So no, I don't think but if you had, I've heard of one guy up in Northern Territory who's got 9,000 bulls in one mob, and big pipes, shitload of water. So it's, I think probably water is going to be a limiting factor. So we're running, we're joining 2,000 females at Holbrook and 2,000 females out at Miranda.
So looking back, is there anything that could have made your transition process to from multiple mobs to one mob that could have made that smoother, or that, you know, if somebody came to you and said, what would you do differently? I
did say that we had a few bruises. So every watering point has to be A1. So on a conventional farm, often there'll be a couple of paddocks, the water's only a bit iffy, and they'll run the bulls in there, or a few rams, or 10 cull cows or something. But in our situation, in this sort of farming, you want lots of paddocks, and you need A1 water in every paddock. You can't have any weak links. And we have had, when we started, we did have some animal performance issues, I think. And that's just dissolved with time, as in more paddocks and more fodder, growing more grass, I think, and just getting rid of some cows. We got rid of, one year we had 20 cows that just looked like shit, so we just got rid of them. We didn't drench them anyway, we just got rid of them. Did a bit of that.
And initially we had sheep as well.
Yeah.
And so we've got rid of all the sheep, so we're just wholly cattle now. So initially we had sheep and cattle and everything all together, and it was a bit of a dogfight because the sheep would stand in the gateway and cows would bowl them over or not go through or whatever. So that was all part of the learning curve. But we just found with a lot of the native perennial grasses we're getting, particularly the summer grasses out west, they can be sort of 6 feet high, and they've got horrible seed heads on them, and just merino sheep and seed heads. And, you know, we weren't going to mow paddocks for the sheep to come in. So whether you did a leader follower, so the cattle went first and the sheep followed, or whatever, it was just complicating everything. So we just went, it's not ideal in our situation for sheep. A lot of people do it with sheep, but just where we were at and what we were doing, we just tried to make everything as simple as possible. So the sheep went. Yeah. And that was 21 years ago.
So it's about the time that you have been having the single mob. And do you have is it a higher stock density than typical in your area as well?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. So we'd be, you know, we've got a figure in the back of our minds, sort of trying to have 40,000 kg per hectare in that paddock. And, you know, a lot of people just wouldn't run across their radar to do something like that. Conventional farmers.
Yeah.
But there is more rotational grazing. You know, there's a lot of people mucking around, you know, doing it to a certain extent now. Excuse me. So, you know, it's a ground cover thing. So it's positive. There's some positive changes.
Yeah. So the shift in management has been worth it financially. It's more profitable for you.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd never go back to conventional farming. I'd still have go to the beach. I would never contemplate going back to conventional farming. The way we were and the way good practice was recognised around here, you know, particularly 15, 20 years ago.
And it was interesting during the drought, the early 2000s, mid-2000s maybe, was it? Anyway, quite a few people came to us saying, well, maybe there is some merit in what you're doing, because fertiliser had gone through the roof, diesel had gone through the roof, and Roundup had gone through the roof. And so they were like, well, maybe there is some merit in what you do because you don't have any of those overhead costs. I mean, a little bit of fuel, obviously, but nothing like they had. But then it rained and then everyone went back to their normal conventional practices. But it was only when it was starting to hurt them financially because of the skyrocketing costs, that they even begin to look at alternative practices.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you mentioned the beach, Michael. So on a personal level, it's, you know, it's been a good thing personally and for your family to have changed, you know, moved to this management.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, absolutely.
But all sorts of things. I mean, there's nothing dangerous on the farm. Like, the cattle are quiet because they're used to human contact. I mean, occasionally you'll get one that kicks or does something, but they're not going to charge you or put you through a fence or whatever. There's no chemicals, there's no big machinery, there's none of that. So the kids are able to go out and move the mob on their own. I mean, they're all grown up now, but so there was none of that, you know, things that you were afraid of the kids getting poisoned or run over or whatever. And it's a time thing. Like, you know, 25 years ago, Michael had got sun up and come back at sundown or more, beyond that. But now, like, he'll go out and he can move the mob, check a fence or whatever, come in for morning tea, he's back in for lunch, he's in, you know, he's physically present a lot more. And so when the kids were little, that was invaluable. You know, because a lot of kids, they don't see their father because they've gone, you know, 12, 14, 15 hours a day. Yes. Whereas everything we do, the kids can be involved in, and he was a lot more involved in their lives because he was here.
I was married to a dairy farmer, so I hear you. Was.
Yeah. And that being the operative. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that was a huge
part.
But
I mean, so yeah, there's so much more quality time as a family. And the freedom, I mean, it's, you know, we can get away quite easily without any full-time staff because we know where the cattle are going, and we've got, you know, fantastic people that we can call on to say, can you do the move tomorrow morning because we're away or whatever. So that's a really valuable part of what we're doing is the planning. And because we have contractors, we're able to say the cattle are coming, we carve on a certain date, the cattle will be coming past the yards on a certain date, so can we book you up? And we can book them, you know, 3 months in advance at least. Whereas a lot of conventional farmers will ring up the night before saying, oh, we're crutching tomorrow, can you come and help? I mean, so even though we don't have full-time staff, because we're so into forward planning, we can book people up that we need well in advance. I don't usually have that issue. Same with getting trucks usually or anything. We know where we're at 12 months of the year.
So how do you do that on paper? Do you have a grazing plan, a feed budget, or is it a paddock plan style that you just know where they'll be moved to?
Well, we used to do the graze plans on charts, but then we got so many paddocks, we found it really cumbersome. And we also, so now we basically, to a large degree, we let the cows tell us what should be done. So if they're running you over at the gateway trying to get a new paddock, you know, there's something, you know, things are starting to get a bit scared with. But I honestly think if you have 180 paddocks, I reckon you're pretty bomb proof. Now that's always a fatal, can be a fatal error, but we look the whole time, we're looking at what we've got ahead of them, and we do. You know, I'll always, or not always, but lots of times I'm just checking how many animal days per hectare we've taken out of a paddock, or what I estimate will be in the next paddock, and how that compares. Keep an eye on their gut fill and the cat and the manure, and just the general demeanour of the cattle.
So we also do speed them up and slow them down. Like sometimes, you know, if there's a lot of grass, we'll speed them up, and other times we'll slow them down depending on the seasonality. But yeah, basically it's one paddock a day, twice a year. I mean, you know, they're in that one paddock. And I mean, so there's a lot of talk about it becoming a system because, you know, you're sort of rotating in the same direction every time and whatever. But I just think the more paddocks you've got, the less that becomes an issue. Like if you've maybe only got 30 paddocks, then that probably can happen. And I mean, there's some talk that no, you shouldn't be in a paddock any longer than 3 days, because once you're in there for longer than 3 days, you start taking a second bite of a growing plant, and that's when you start losing plants because they die off because there's too much root mass taken, etc., etc. So, you know, the more paddocks you have, the less likelihood there is of that happening.
Yeah, not eating the root reserves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's the end of the questions that I had on the list. Is there anything further? Is there anything I've missed or anything you'd like to add?
Just on, you know, every season's a bit different. And so you're not getting, it's not as if the cows are in, you know, this paddock the 1st of March every year, which they're not, but if they were, it's still going to be different because you might have had rain or you might not have had rain. You know, there's all and so I just, I really think the systems one's overplayed a bit, but anyway, that's how we feel. And if you do pick up something that it might be untoward, well, you tweak it so it's not, you know. So, but yeah,
You're constantly observing and adapting and tweaking and
yes.
Yeah.
But I think doing the charts was invaluable when we didn't have many paddocks.
Yeah,
it taught us a lot, and also it really brought home how many more animal days you get out of a small paddock than a bigger paddock.
Right.
Per day.
and
So to get what I mean by that, so we had at Miranda, we had one paddock that was 50 hectares, and we could comfortably get a day's grazing out of that when we started, where the next paddock was 150, we couldn't get 3 days grazing out of it. Understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We couldn't harvest, and or if we did start getting really reduced animal performance. And you know, we had a few days with Alan Savory in Zimbabwe, and he said, you know, have a look at what your smallest paddock's doing, and that will give you a bit of a lead in to what, if you've got a small paddock away from the yards a bit or whatever.
So we're looking for high density, short graze period, long recovery period.
That's all we're trying.
Basically all we're working everything on. So lots of animals, lots of impact, lots of dung and urine, in for a short time and then out for a long time.
Yeah, and then so they eat what they want, and then they push the rest to the soil surface, which gives you your ground cover to leave behind.
Yeah.
And feeds your microbes and everything else. And so it's building soil.
Yeah.
All that organic matter's going into the soil. And then by the time the cattle are back, that's all been absorbed and cycled in the nutrient cycling. And yeah, so it's, so that's another thing, is trying to get that massive or that bulk of feed onto the ground. So it's either got to be trampled or eaten.
Yep. And then that helps with your water infiltration as well, doesn't it?
Yep. So then your water cycle, your mineral cycle, everything's starting to function as it should.
Yep.
And it's exponential, really. Like the amount of grass you'll grow, the amount of water that you will hold in the soil. I mean, that's one thing we noticed, I think, too, with all the ground cover that we do have and the bulk of feed, we get a lot less runoff into dams. So sometimes you sort of go, oh, that dam hasn't filled. Or neighbours were also sort of going, can we check that you haven't built a dam above us because our dam's not filling? And going, go for your life. And it's literally the ground cover that we had was keeping that rainfall on our place instead of, you know, rushing down the hill and filling his dam.
Infiltrating where it lands.
So yeah, absolutely. So dams mightn't be filling, but it's going into the soil. So, yeah, that was a bit of a shock initially sometimes.
Yeah, and so critical in these dry areas, isn't it? And the dry times.
But now it's not. I mean, most of the dams are full most of the year now, so it's not so much of an issue. But yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much. Was there anything else that that I've missed? Any gaping hole there?
I don't think so. I mean, we keep it very simple.
Yeah.
100% ground cover, 100% of the time, short grace period, high density, long recovery period. And that's it, basically. And fertility we concentrate on with our cows. So.
Your nature's complex enough without us complicating it on top of it, isn't it?
That's exactly right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's human nature trying to complicate things, but it's just take that step back and let nature do its thing, and it's amazing how well she does it.
Yeah, lovely. Look, thank you so much. I can send, I'll turn the recording off.